ministers whose cabinet fell on this subject. Basically, there are many different variations on the basic theme that demand-side management is unavoidable when you talk about traffic and about congestion. And the other basic notion is that individual financial incentives are the most effective instrument. Mind you, that's especially in the Netherlands. You know how to get 100 Dutch people in the Volkswagen, you throw in €1 and but still, from the economic point of view, that's the best incentive. And I would like to add, provided that there are enough alternatives for road transportation, because otherwise the price elasticity of the demand is much too low to be able to make a shift. Now, the early schemes in the 70s, 80s, no, 80s, 90s, they resembled very much the international systems that are used internationally in Singapore, in Stockholm, in the USA also. Basically toll gates. And well, the common characteristic of all these systems is that none of them made it. And why didn't they? Well, basically, sometimes there were economic reasons, sometimes there were other reasons, but basically it's all about public and political support. As long as you talk about raising the price, and I think we're no different from the United States, there's a general public outcry that raising taxes for any policy purpose at all is, well, to say the least, frowned upon. But before I go into that, let me give you some statistics about the Netherlands. We're a small country. North-south is 250 miles. East-west is 120 miles, so that would not even compare to, well, say, maybe it's about Los Angeles, maybe that kind of size. We have 60 million people, a bit more, 8 million cars, 2,400 kilometers of highways, excuse me for not translating that in miles. But, well, the statistics are here, and we have our congestion problems in mainly the west side of the country, Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam, and Utrecht, and I should like to add here the region of Eindhoven, which is very congested also. Typically, our modal split would be 80% car and 20% train and bus. And, well, I give you one statistic that we're particularly proud of, that is our traffic fatalities are down to 800 per year in total. We have a few toll locations, but those that we have are specifically in place for paying for infrastructure, like tunnels and bridges, and those tolling systems are removed as soon as the cost of the tunnel or bridge is being retrieved. That's the basic thing. And we raise 7.8 billion euros in taxes, on vehicle taxes annually. That's important when we start looking about the program that we're talking about here. Well, I guess our mobility problems are no different from those in the United States, in any densely populated city or region. We expect passenger car use to augment with 15 to 20% till 2030, and we expect an increase of heavy-duty vehicle use of 60 to 70% in the next 20 years. So the problem is not going to go away. Maybe after 2040, our scenarios indicate that there will be some lessening of the growth, but there will still be growth. If we look at vehicle hours lost and take 2000 as the index year, in 2006 we were up to 143 as compared to 2100. At the same time, though, the productivity of the network has increased by 1 to 2% per year, and it still does. which of course means that we're that the rush hour is moving to earlier times in the morning, and of course later in the morning. And rush hour typically would start at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon already now, whereas a few years ago that was half an hour later. The downside of that, of course, is that, well, the roads are used better, but the downside is that we have very small time for road maintenance. Another little problem. Now, our policy has been, for maybe not all these 25, 30 years, but for the last 10 years in any case, based on 3 approaches. The first is building more infrastructure. Now, in this country, building more infrastructure is pretty difficult. Not only because there's little space, but we have pretty rabid environmental groups who would try to stop any kind of extension of the road network. If it were only, you know, even lanes, adding lanes, they would definitely try to take us to the Supreme Court for any kind of addition to the infrastructure. They do. Oh, sorry. I'll try and talk a little louder after I've had some more.
Sorry, we don't have a mic system in here.
I'll try to speak up. So building is not the solution. Well, it's part of the solution, and well, actually, we've put in place for next year a new legislation, which would allow us to take forward 30 infrastructure projects. But those are sort of emergency legislation. The second approach is improve utilization of the network. Now, you've all had a copy of the Vision 2020 on traffic management, and that sort of points out the road we want to go with utilization of the network. Traffic management, I can go on for that for hours, but it's not the subject of today, but it's a very interesting subject, and you know, and unlike road pricing, traffic management has been introduced and is successful at the moment. So that's an interesting story for some other time. And then the third, of course, is pricing, paying for the use of the infrastructure. Now, in our strategic planning, as you do undoubtedly, we work with macroeconomic scenarios. And on the left of this slide, you see the long-term scenarios without pricing, and on the right-hand side, you see the scenarios where pricing is introduced. On the left-hand side, that's the scenario which includes building and traffic management. So we've tried to separate the two. Although it's a theoretical exercise, there's still a lot of imponderables introduced in that equation, but it tells you that if you look at the yellow line, which is the ambition, the policy ambition, which would lie at an index of 60 as compared to 100 in the year 2000, pricing alone would account for 1/3 of the reduction of vehicle hours lost. And you see that only in the global economy scenario, none of the 3 approaches would make us able to reach the policy target. Now, what did we learn of 30 years of history? There is really no technique that we have not studied in the course of that period. And as I said before, political and public acceptance is really the key to road pricing. And you know, when we're in trouble politically in the Netherlands, or we don't know how to figure things out, we put in place a commission. I guess that's pretty universal. So I know there are some commission members here. So we had a commission, and as we usually do in these circumstances. And interesting, whom do you make chair of such a commission? Now we took Mr. Nouwen. Now that's no, Mr. Nouwen was the former chair of the Road Users Association, and in 1999 he was sort of the enfigurement of resistance against road pricing. So we took him on board. You know, if you can't join them, if you can't beat them, join them. In any case, we put all stakeholders on this commission. So that's including the industry, including the navigation industry, the car industry, also environmentalist groups, also groups concerned with privacy, privacy problems. And, well, of course, the Commission comes up with an advice. And the interesting thing is that the advice went a lot further than many of us had expected. The basics of it is a kilometer price varying according to place and time, but also the effects on the environment. So that was probably a little bit of the influence of the environmentalist groups on that commission. And it will be there for all Dutch roads, hard roads, and all motor vehicles, none accepted. But it went further, and well, that was novel, really. The Commission proposed to eliminate the fixed annual taxes on car purchase and car ownership, and to turn those into a variable tax depending on price, on time, place, and environmental characteristics. The third is a very important one, much more important than you might think, is the revenues invested in this mobility policy have to go back to road infrastructure and parallel to infrastructure for public transport. I'll say a little more about that in a minute. So, if this is introduced, you know, you can have this big Chevrolet sitting in the driveway. As long as you don't drive it, it doesn't cost you anything. Well, not in terms of taxes. As soon and your Beetle, you know, your Volkswagen Beetle, if you drive with that, it'll cost you a lot less than driving a Chevy. So everybody can afford a big car in the driveway as long as he doesn't drive it, which is fine for ownership. But let's be fair, fuel tax in the Netherlands, we discussed this a little bit before we came in here, fuel tax is pretty high. And we're not changing that. So fuel tax is variable. Some people say if you just raise the fuel tax enough, that will have the same effect as road pricing. And it's much simpler than introducing all that technology. But we are already at well, roughly €2 per liter, so we figured out how much was that? $8.5 a gallon, and we've still got congestion. So that's not the only answer in any case. But we're certainly not going to lower the fuel tax, as that is part of the income of the Minister of Finance.
Is that the tax or the price?
Sorry?
Is that the tax or the price?
No, the price is €2, roughly €2 per liter, and tax is about half that. The other interesting thing, and we'll go into the technology a bit later on, is that it's for all roads and all vehicles. And that, of course, points you directly at GPS as the technology to realize this. So we did a lot of research about other possibilities, and anytime we just came up with GPS as the sole technology available within the period that we're talking about. Well, if you have a commission, you do wisely to follow the advice of the commission, as long as you like it. And so the advice of the commission became the leading principle. Now there we made a mental turn. We not only called the report Anders betalen voor mobiliteit, which is Dutch for pay differently for mobility. So we don't use the word road pricing or don't use it anymore, which is in terms of communication, of course, only a gag, but it's not unimportant. And the motto which we gave for this new policy direction was actually fair deal. Because in terms of communication, it is very important to stress that there will be no extra costs for the car driver. If he drives normally, if he drives a lot, he will have some extra costs, but on average, the cost for the car driver will not increase due to this system. And especially this system is not meant to increase government budget. So all the revenues are dedicated to the transport budget, and none of them will go to the Minister of Finance. That was a very important principle for this Commission, and it was accepted by the politicians. They added a couple of things though, and they said the implementation cost, the investments, should be less than 3 billion euros, and the operating cost should not exceed 5% of the revenues. Now those are pretty heavy constraints, especially the latter. I think we are calculating at this moment that the operating cost would be about 10% of the revenues, and our notion is that in the long term we might be able to get down to 5% on average. That's a very, very severe constraint. And of course we had to assure that road pricing would not simply mean that no roads were going to be built anymore. Well, I showed you the scenarios. If you turn them around and you only introduce road pricing and you do no traffic management and no building, you'll still have a problem in 2020. So fair deal, that was the name that we gave to this policy development. And by the way, it's not only a fair deal, but it's also a package deal. The stakeholders involved in this commission, and they're still pretty adamant about it to this day, where the commission gives reports already a year and a half ago, is government, don't be selective, don't go shopping selectively in the package. Because as soon as you do that, you'll lose public and political support for this scheme. So I guess their government will have to show that it's reliable and not do selective shopping there. Now this is our current Minister of Transport. He was responsible for introducing the government decision in the cabinet, and well, basically a couple of items were added in that decision. Of course, the fixed tax is to be converted into price per kilometer for all roads, differentiation, and we put a timetable to the introduction. In 2011, the system will start with pricing lorries, heavy-duty vehicles, and passenger cars will have it introduced in the course of 2012 and 2016. And to get used to road pricing, 100 million euros was reserved for a program to start mobility projects as of this year. We decided that GPS technology was fine, and basically the decision was taken to start on with a dedicated back office. So it's a specific back office which would take the data and send the invoice to the user. I'll come back to that. But to aim in the long run for a system of multi-service providers. Now this is a double track system, which I'll explain. But first, you know, in the Netherlands, in Netherlands politics, you need to put landmarks in your decision-making process. And these I tell here were some of the landmarks. So in May of this year, the cabinet decided on the conversion of the fixed purchase tax and to start preparing the legislation of that. And cabinet decided on the functionality of the organization, on the implementation strategy, and the political ambition is very, very high. I mean, introducing this for lorries, I mean, as a road agency, we're talking about our budgets for 2011 to 2014. Basically for 2009 and 2010, our budget's already fixed. And so we're talking about something which goes straight through all budgetary planning, of course. So this is ambitious. But something these 20 years of history told us that political acceptance erodes with time. And already now, after this cabinet decision, which everybody was in favor of more or less, the majority of Parliament a year ago, you see already a movement on the right-wing side of our Parliament to sort of withdraw from the commitment to road pricing, whereas the right wing was in the cabinet at the moment that this decision was taken. So you already see political movements. So that's why the cabinet decided to keep the pressure on it and to what we call in political jargon take irreversible steps before the next elections in 2012. It was decided, actually it's being decided on at this moment, that a tender might start for a field operational test involving 60,000 vehicles. Now, one of the most important issues when you talk about road pricing is setting the charge. And now we have a problem here, because there are actually three determining factors which are important to set the charge. The tax income is a fixed notion. If you change fixed taxes to variable taxes, you will probably get a charge of about 7 euro cents per kilometer. That would be the conversion rate at the moment. But if you look at the effects that you want to achieve on road usage, you'd probably have 3.5 euro cents per kilometer would be enough to reach the traffic effects that you want. And we've learned that to couple the left-hand side the needed budget for road management to any of these figures, to either road usage or to tax, is very risky in political terms. Because as soon as you do that, you start coupling finance, public finance, to taxes. And that's a risky business. So these mismatches, we don't really know yet quite well how to tackle those. It's one of the lessons that we're going to learn in the next few years. And one thing that concerns me is who will be responsible in the end for setting the charge. Will that be Parliament? Will that be the minister? Will it be the road agency? Or will it be a combination? Will it be with widths, bandwidths, you know, between so much and so much? That's part of the legislation that's being formulated at the moment. Another important issue is, do we remain public or do we go with the market? Well, we've had long discussions about this, and we actually chose some kind of hedging strategy. Our preference is that the private market service providers will take over much of the road pricing, the whole system, even invoicing, etc., etc. So a free market model in which certifications of organizations, service provider organizations, has to be arranged, and technology, for instance, the onboard units, have to be certified. And that gives the possibility to combine that service with other services like navigation and traffic information, insurance per kilometer, mobility services, etc. So a market might emerge. We're not sure that it will. Actually, I was talking to some of these private partners during the New York ITS conference, and well, when you talk to them over lunch, they're very, very interested. But they're still sort of, you know, on a wait-and-see mode officially to see what they can do as private market parties. So, because we're not sure that the market will really emerge, we have a second track, the public track, which is a publicly controlled organization, which actually will be set up in tendering with the market parties. But basically the responsibility will be a public one. And so even if no market emerges, we will still be able to introduce the system. But then, of course, no interesting other services like parking assistance and what have you will be in place. We hope, though, and market parties have promised that they would be very interested, that they would be coming forward with consortia to enter competition in this. We hope and we expect that market parties will enter into this game, and the more they do it, the less, of course, the public track is necessary. But in the meantime, we're not leaving that to chance, because I told you about these 100 million euros that the cabinet reserved for a mobility program, which has two goals: of course, helping congestion or reducing congestion, and secondly, to stimulate mobility services markets. And actually, that works quite well. I know there's about 4 or 5 consortia tendering for a number of projects which look to regional stimulation of reduction of commuting by car, trying to get people to commute outside rush hours, use car technology. These are all regional initiatives around the cities of Rotterdam, for instance. One is already in place, and Amsterdam will be next, and I guess the others will follow. Though typically these would look like agreements between the public sector and the market parties to introduce these systems in those particular regions. I'm quite optimistic about that, and if that works well for the next couple of years, I think we might be optimistic about a market emerging to do the real thing in 2011. Now, I promised you that I would be talking something about technology. This looks fairly complicated, but maybe I can give you some insight in how it is supposed to work. It is none of this is realized yet, so I know I'm talking perhaps in Fata Morgana, as you know, but we're pretty confident, so otherwise I wouldn't stand here. Now central in this picture is the car with its onboard equipment, and this onboard equipment has what we call a trusted element. That trusted element is a high-tech element which couples the car to his tax number, basically. We use the existing certified installation market with testing stations and so on, the regular yearly car testing for safety. We use those as the parties who will be certified to build in these onboard equipment into the car. The car's driving, and there are two lines of communication. A communication straightly to the dedicated back office, the public back office that I was talking about, or the communication to service providers. With the service providers, of course, shifting the information and sending it to the dedicated back office. The dedicated back office is the only one that can send an invoice to the holder, who then, of course, will have to pay separately or in one go. We'll see how that works out, to the service provider for the services that he has bought from that service provider. There is, however, a secondary system. I should have put it in a different slide, but this symbolizes the secondary system. It symbolizes, for instance, a foreign heavy-duty vehicle, a German heavy-duty vehicle with a different onboard unit. And in that secondary system, is designed with a view to interoperability. Yeah, I never get that word pronounced. That makes it possible that foreign cars, and it goes for heavy vehicles, but it might also work for passenger cars, can still be recognized by the system. But that would be a separate payment track. And enforcement is guaranteed either by portals with measuring systems, especially designed to make the connection between the car, the fiscal number, and the time of passage. So that would be a system. It would, of course, photograph the license plate or read out the onboard unit. And so for this enforcement back office, we are looking at DSRC technology to make that possible. Skip the next one. Now, what technology will be used in this system? Well, the functional demand that we register road usage on all roads makes it that traditional toll technology is not applicable here. So GPS is the only reliable technology now, as I already said. We were hoping for Galileo, of course, to be in place in time, but we sort of messed that up in the European Union, I guess. So we're still be dependent on you guys. So you can shut down our road pricing system, push of the button. So please help us and keep it in the air, and otherwise we'll have a little problem in the Netherlands. The onboard equipment registers all vehicle movements on all paved roads. Well, that's also a GPS technology. And as I said, DSRC technology will be there for the enforcement. Well, I guess I talked about the private service provider and the public track, and I think I'll skip that one and go over to the impact of privacy requirements. Well, I guess this is one of the critical issues in terms of public acceptance. We have had some experience with public transit chip cards, and I can tell you this is really a difficult issue. I think the chip card is going to be introduced now in the Netherlands on a broad scale, but there are still discussions about the reliability and the privacy aspects of that technology. Personal data is protected as it is in the United States by law. We have a national privacy commissioner, and he was in on these discussions. And so the conclusion was that there will be no central registration of vehicle movements. Only aggregated data is sent to the back office. So, you know, the number of kilometers in a certain tariff area at a certain time, and only on the basis of those aggregated data, the invoice will be made up. Service provider can, of course, use personal data, but only after written consent by the user. We think that this is a foolproof system. The operational tests, you know, the 60,000 vehicles will have to prove if that's right. But we are pretty confident this will be able to work. But you know, the chip cards, those are very expensive lessons. There's a downside to that. If you only use aggregated data, it's probably so that these data are not suitable for traffic management. Of course, in my office, we would like to have all these data to improve real-time traffic management. But on the aggregated scale, that's probably impossible. We'll have to find out, but I don't think we'll be able to do it. I don't think there's any pricing service anywhere in the world where that is combined with traffic management. Even in Japan, where I was last week, you see a very severe distinction between electronic toll collection and any other kind of instrument because of, well, as soon as taxes are concerned, we become a little jittery. I was going to tell you something about the European or international issues, but I think I'll only tell you something about interoperability. And well, it's of course, as being such a small country, it's of course obvious that we should actually wait for the European Union. That would be much better, and it would be very sound if we did that. The only trouble is the European Union is not fast enough. It usually isn't, but in this particular case, we are not intending to wait for the European Union. So we are getting down to bilateral agreements with Germany and Belgium about introducing this system, and for them to hitch along on this project. Well, the Belgians might do so, the Germans, I don't think so, but you know, with backup systems, we'll be able to do some interoperability with our neighbors. And well, we're pushing for standardization of the European electronic toll system, but we sure are not going to wait for the European Union to get ready on that one. And so I guess that foreign users will pay a fixed fee until this European electronic toll system has been realized. Well, I guess that sort of concludes the presentation I have for you. I think we're here working on, let's say, maybe not front-edge technology, but front-edge political aims. And I think we'll have to find out in the next year when I hope that Parliament in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time will definitely decide on going ahead with this field operational test, which will of course have to be the proof of concept, and that I'll be able to get here here next year and tell you that okay, we're in place and we can introduce it, and we'll start in 2011. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
That's really an amazing presentation, and it raised a lot of questions. I think the main thing I learned from you was that you have a model that I think the U.S. should emulate, which is that you do everything that the Commission says you should do. Anybody from Congress here, just remember that. So, we have plenty of time for questions, comments. If you could raise your hand and then first identify who you are, and then
I'm Gabriel Roth. I actually served on the SMED committee in England, which reported on this sort of thing longer than 30 years ago. And I'd like to congratulate the speaker on a very fine presentation and a very interesting system. And I hope it will work well. And I hope that the Commission here will pay attention to what is happening in the Netherlands. I have one comment. You mentioned that one problem was how to fix the charge. Why not do it by a system of bidding? Take segments of roads, invite the private sector to either provide them or to maintain them, and to bid for how many cents per kilometer they want to be paid. Now this is something that has been running in Britain for some time. They're called shadow tolls, and they give contracts like that to private consortia to maintain or provide roads. Another advantage is that the consortia would advance the money. They would finance it. So there would be help on the capital side. And in that way, you would get market pricing for roads, at least that are not congested. This is one suggestion.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you understood the question, but the question was about fixing the charge. We're still working on that, and Mr. Roth's suggestion is to introduce a bidding system where private parties bid on segments of roads and set a price. It's an interesting suggestion, and I do think that it has been considered. And I think it works well if you only limit your system to clearly defined highways or segments of highways or recognizable roads. But the moment that you start charging, let's say I live in this very old area of a city very near The Hague, and in that particular place, all roads are all bent and with corners and whatever. It's even my GPS device gets me lost in my own neighborhood. It's amazing, but it does. And so I guess there's a problem. So I'm not sure about that, but I think that
No, the GPS system will recognize the charge on each segment of road, charge the user accordingly, and then the system will pay for that segment.
Why don't we move on, because we have plenty of time, lots of people have their hands. Why don't we go here? Here.
Alan Greenberg, Federal Highway Administration. You mentioned the cap on 5% on the cost of the system relative to the revenues that it'll collect. How expensive do you envision this being to retrofit each car? Is this, are you going to go for bids on this? How is all this going to happen in a practical way?
Well, I think the business case at the moment shows that we're talking about 6 billion euros investment, and I really don't know the exact figure of the operation cost. But the investment cost would be 6 billion.
And that would equip how many cars?
All cars.
I'm just trying to get if we want to do this in the U.S., for example, I'm just trying to get all would be how many? I mean, what's the cost per vehicle if the state in the U.S. wanted to do this? I'm trying to apply your figures.
Well,
oh yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm not exactly sure of the figure there, and I know that there will be subsidies for the onboard equipment, but some of it will have to be paid by the car users themselves. And I'm not familiar with the exact figure of the operation costs.
Are you trying to get OEMs to put this in new vehicles?
Oh yes.
I'm sorry, original equipment manufacturers, the car makers themselves.
Yeah, sure. That would be the end figure, of course. Yes. Yes. We'd be very happy if car manufacturers would equip the car straight away. We'd still have to introduce the trusted device though. So that would be a requirement of any onboard equipment, that it would have the open standard where this particular piece of equipment could be added. Yes. Only we don't have a car industry in the Netherlands, as you know. So we're dependent on other car industries to do this. So I think we're for the first.
We may not have one either.
I'm Joris, I'm senior economist at GEO, and one reason I have is that some years ago I worked with a Dutch economist, Eric Verhoeven, and when you're talking about all this changing the fixed purchase tax into a variable tax, I don't know whether you're talking the same thing. So I just want to kind of confirm with you. So basically, you want to kind of convert the say for example you have registration tax, and then you want to kind of have a baseline. Say for example with past year you collected like $10 billion, but then now instead of just charging a fixed tax, then you want to kind of vary it, depends on the place and time, and get the same results as saying at the end of it I should get 10 billion. Is that right? Is that saying the same concept?
Yes.
And then now your problem right now is how to fix the charge, that toll, so that it won't go too much higher, but won't go too much lower. Is that right?
That's right.
So, okay. I just want to make sure that I understand it.
Sure. We're talking about variables in place, time, and environmental characteristics. So those three. Okay. Maybe in the future, with more detailed GPS system, we might be able to introduce road segments, or but for the time being, these are the variables that we consider. Yeah.
But also you mentioned in addition that say for example you collect more than 10 billion, the baseline, and then that additional money will be designated for future road investment. Is that right?
It would be dedicated to road investment, but also to public transit investments, and anything. It might even go to dikes and levees, as long as it remains within the budget of the Minister of Transport. So this is not in order to fix our own budget, that's not the purpose. It's the public acceptance of it not going to the Minister of Finance. That's basically it's a negative argument. So as soon as you put these taxes to the central budget, people don't believe that it's going to get back into the system. But people understand that when you convert these taxes, you will raise more money than you need to maintain the roads, because we're raising more money with it than we need now. So that would be pretty logical. And so our Minister of Transport did not want to become completely dependent on the income from road tax for his own budget. So it's not a purpose, it's just a mechanism.
So we'll go Craig here, and then this gentleman over here.
Thank you. Craig Lynch, Financing Commission. I'm interested in a little more detail on your analysis of compliance issues. In particular, first of all, have you forecasted the extent to which you would have non-compliance as a percentage of the revenue that you expect to generate? And secondly, what kinds of secondary or tertiary, if you want to call it fail-safe mechanisms, a little more specifically, have you put in place to try to ensure that you have a high level of compliance?
Well, we're optimists. Our starting point is 100% compliance.
Which won't be difficult in the voluntary test.
That's right. That's right. The system, though, is basically designed because we have a right to have that kind of position, because if we abolish fixed taxes and we make them variable, in principle, every car owner, or car driver, I should say, every car driver would profit from that system. And so it would be logical that every car would be equipped with an onboard unit. So we expect because we couple it to the tax system, and everybody has a tax number, we expect, well, nearly 100% compliance. There will be exemptions. There will be foreign car drivers or truck drivers. We're talking about a fixed price. And we have an enforcement strategy in place. And, well, basically, I suppose that at one point we'll have to face, of course, non-compliance. But those will primarily be tackled via the enforcement track.
How do you figure out who's not compliant?
We have portals with cameras and DSRC technology, which is introduced in the chip. And police will be equipped with technology to read out onboard units. And we'll have, checks, road checks like we have for drunken driving, etc.
Gentleman right here.
Yeah, Dave Plazik with Transportation Research Board. I'm curious how fine your zone system is, or how large your zones are.
So am I. I think that's one of the things that we'll have to work out, and that was part of the field operational test. We know that the zone around the western side, the Randstad, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, and The Hague, will probably be in the highest level of taxes. I think we're not looking to a very big zone differentiation. Not, that's a partly an answer to your question. We're not looking to a differentiation, from mile to mile. It's on roughly the zones that we're talking about, and well, we'll probably be able to get more detail on that, get the system more detailed, as time goes on. But for the time being, we're looking at pretty big zones, like Randstad in rush hour, that sort of zoning. Otherwise, we'd probably begin with complicating the system to such an extent that we probably wouldn't be able to manage it. And, well, I think the more precise specification will follow in time. The interesting thing, of course, is whether if you do that kind of charging with fairly large zones, whether it will have the expected result. That was, of course, that's the game that we'll have to play, and well, we'll find out with our test.
Yes, sir, right back here and then here.
Good morning. Bob Dunphy with Urban Land Institute. You mentioned one of the criteria were environmental factors, and that was in response to some pushback that you've had from the environmental community. Can you explain in more detail what those are? That price and place and environment, is that right?
Yes. Well, every car will be categorized according to its emission characteristics. So I think we'll be taking into account, let's say, NOx, SO2, and of course also the fuel consumption. And those will put every car in a specific category, and that will be the basic category on which the fee is taken into account into the fee.
Is that every car or every type of car?
That's a good question. I don't know. I should think every car.
So there would be an individual test when they do their emissions
Yes.
test.
Type of car.
I
I think
type
it's
is
I don't know.
easy.
I'm not quite sure about that. It's type of car. Yeah, if you look at fuel consumption, it's probably type of car.
Yeah, sure. Right here.
Dr. Allen, Karen Hedlund from the Nosson Law Firm, and I have a legal question for you.
I was afraid someone was going to ask a legal question.
And let me follow up on the question about enforcement. Could you comment on your international agreements? Do those go to the issue of enforcement? For example, will the Netherlands and Germany go beyond merely sharing vehicle identification numbers? Would Germany actually be willing to take legal action against a lorry that was registered in Germany for a violation in the Netherlands?
Well, so I'm always afraid of legal questions, so I don't know the exact answer to that one. We're still working with the Germans and the Belgian neighbors on those particular issues. So I know that we're, sorry?
Yeah, that's happening already.
those talks are taking place. I don't know the outcome of the talks yet. But we are pushing in the European Union for this European system. But then, as I said, we're not going to wait for that.
We're trying to figure out how to get New York and New Jersey to cooperate.
Well, it was
Jack.
with the New York Port Authority. They might have some ambition in that.
I'm Jack Wells from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Could you go into a little more detail on the evolution of political thinking on this? What finally led the original opponents of this kind of charging system to support it?
I think the two main factors were the let's say the tax neutrality and the budget neutrality. I think those were the two main extra arguments which swayed the opinion. The technology, as I said, is not all that old. Is not all that new. But I think it's especially the on average neutrality for the driver, and the fact that funds were not going to be diverted into, well, swimming pools for provincial, municipal cities and whatever, you know. That was, I think, the main reason why the support could exist. The other one might be the possibility to introduce the environmental characteristics in the pricing equation. But I think the first two were even more important. We had the environmental issue already in earlier schemes, and they were not enough in themselves to move public opinion. But as I said, it's a package deal, and as soon as there are some talks. The Minister of Finance, for instance, is also of course, on these discussions, and the Minister of Finance doesn't really like this kind of budgetary predestination. But as soon as they start sort of, pulling at the corners of this agreement, we sort of, are able to raise public opinion on this, and the Minister of Finance has to, don't tell him that. Oh, it's televised.
No, we'll delete that part.
So I think those are the two main arguments.
Jeff right here, then in the back, then here.
Jeff Uraima with the Financing Commission. You mentioned earlier that you have pre-existing tolled facilities, and presumably this is an overlay on that, but nevertheless the VMT charge varies based upon congestion and time of day. So will this affect the tolled facilities in any way?
That's an interesting one. We have very few tolled facilities at the moment. And I think most of the ones that we have are near the end of their financial payback time. Thank you. So those probably won't be a problem. The bigger problem is that private investors are very interested to design, build, finance our highways, and they're only beginning to show that interest. I guess it's safer than mortgages, and I think this will have to take up with the banks and the investors how we're going to tackle this. But basically, this tax supersedes all other taxes. So if you have a private road with tolls, this is an additional tax. That's the basic principle. Whether we'll be able to make that, or whether that will sort of deteriorate the business case for the private sector investor, that we'll have to find out. Because people will not want to take those roads, of course.
So the gentleman in the back, we'll go here, here, and here.
Yeah, I'm Darren Springer with the National Governors Association. I was curious if there's going to be any sort of a subsidy for low-income users, particularly given that there's going to be a congestion fee and the VMT fee, and that they might be affected differently than they would be under the current tax system.
I think I recognize the philosophy behind the question, and it's of course one of the arguments in politics. Is the low-income person not going to be at a disadvantage? Well, we say no, because he always has the choice not to drive his car, to take public transport. We know that a lot of employers will of course refund the cost of road charging. So they don't need it for their work, but given a good choice between using roads and using public transit, which is I think pretty well organized in the Netherlands and will be after we've injected the 5 billion euros that are going into that program for the next couple of years, I think we'll have a substitute system even for low income. So, but I know it's a sensitive issue in politics, especially on the left wing, in the left wing parties. I know.
Isn't your current car fee based on the value of the car, though, and so low-income people have cheaper cars, and so...
Yeah, that's what you would say, but when I drive through those particular neighborhoods where these low-income people are supposed to live, I see all these Mercedeses, and, you know, and so there's no direct relationship. But of course there's an issue, undoubtedly, and I think in the end that's the final say is to politics, whether they will accept that or not. But it's not, at the outset, we don't foresee any specific subsidy for low income.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, you're
Tony Ruffalo, I'm at Oregon State University visiting at USDOT, and I've done a lot of analysis of the Oregon project. One of the concerns there is the issue of the phase-in and transition. You talked about congestion pricing, but a 4-year phase-in for vehicles. How would the pricing system work? Congestion pricing doesn't work unless you have a very large percentage of the vehicles equipped.
That's right. Well, that's another good question. We are looking at a phase-in which will take 4 years, and I guess we will start on a voluntary basis, and we'll have incentives, fee reductions if you use this system, or maybe we can get together with the service providers to make it especially attractive to have one of these units. So we'll start from voluntary introduction to mandatory introduction by the end of that period.
When we were talking at the ITIF World Congress, you mentioned that you're introducing a reservation system for trucks between Rotterdam and Antwerp. And how do you reconcile that effort with this pricing effort? Will the pricing effort supersede the reservation system, or will you do both? And you might also want to sort of tie this question into trade-offs between equity and efficiency, because it sort of speaks to some of those issues.
Well, first let me clear up a misunderstanding. When we talk about a reservation system with slot allotment,
yes,
and so on, the one I was talking to you about was on the waterways. So between the port of Rotterdam and the port of Antwerp. So we were talking about the possibility of introducing that in the long term into the road system as well. So we're not there yet, and it's not part of this program. So I think it's a little premature to go into the interaction between two systems. I think if you would, apart from all this, if you would look at slot allotment, as we do actually in the port of Rotterdam on a voluntary basis, there are companies who allow their trucks to go onto a particular highway only in batches of 5, and then with intervals of half an hour or an hour, depending on the number of vehicles on the road and the congestion. But if you start to introduce that, I think it would basically not change the fact that they drive at a particular time in a particular area with a particular vehicle. So I don't see that slot allotment would interfere with road pricing. But we're a long time from introducing that on a mandatory basis in any case. But and if I hope, more or less expect that if this system is in place, we might postpone that kind of system, slot allotment, for a long time yet. Right. And maybe just introduce it in areas where, you know, for the next 5 years, we'll have a bigger problem than we can handle.
Steve, here.
Steve Godwin with the Transportation Research Board. I'm interested in having you explain a little bit more about the trusted equipment that will be on the vehicle, what the components are, and how you deal with two issues. One is tampering and creating some sort of an audit trail for people who might be concerned they're being taxed unfairly. The reason I ask is because adding technology onto a vehicle would encourage creative entrepreneurs to come up with some sort of a technology to game the system that the enforcement wouldn't look back. So have you thought through those problems and do you have solutions?
We've thought them through and we've defined them in terms of risks. The tampering with the onboard equipment, we hope to avoid by having a very few certified organizations allowed to install this particular device. So they would not be basically automatically a part of the onboard equipment. You might perhaps have onboard equipment without it. We had to create a standard for the onboard equipment to be able to accept the trusted device. So, but we know that this requires a lot of attention, and that's why we will not put that in the open market, so that with a fairly closed market with certified organizations. Well, the audit trail, as I said, the units would be intelligent units in a sense that they would aggregate the information. So that was sort of a black box, you know, and reading out the black box would only be possible for you know, the back office, dedicated back office, or by the service provider, given that they have been given permission to do so.
I think we have time for one more, and you had your hand up first. So.
I'm John Stell from PricewaterhouseCoopers. I believe one of your slides showed projections of congestion, both with the road fee and without the road fee. And I was curious, really, some of the change will be attributable to people switching to public transportation. Some of it will be attributable to people rearranging their schedules and driving less congested times, or buying more efficient vehicles. Do you have any breakout of kind of like how important each of those pieces is?
No, I don't have the specific breakout for the cause and effect thing in the scenarios, but what we expect is that a lot of the short-range commuter traffic will diminish pretty severely. We did some pilots and experiments in the Netherlands in several areas, and we know from our calculations that for any traffic jam, structural traffic jam area, if you can take out maybe a few thousand vehicles from that particular place at a particular time, we would have no congestion at all. The only trouble in the Netherlands, of course, is that as soon as one car goes out of the queue, another 2 or 3 pop in. So that's the problem. But we expect that especially short-range commuter traffic, suburb to city and the other way, will be say, enticed to take public transit. Bringing the kids to school in your car would start to cost you not only your petrol, but also your fee. And in order to be able to reach that kind of fee, we're talking about a few euros per time unit. So it would not be cheap to get your kids to school by car. You really have to dig into your financial reserves to do that, or not take any kids. But so I don't have the specific breakdown, but I'm sure that they're there, and I'll be very glad to send more information if it's available.
Transition is tricky.
So there's a famous Supreme Court Justice Brandeis in the U.S. who once said, they were considering what the federal government should do to innovate. They said states are the laboratories of democracy. I think now in a global economy, we should say small countries are the laboratories of democracy. And we will continue to watch what you're doing and learn and let you take all the risks and figure out how to do it. And then it's a copy. There's a whole thing in business that it's not the first adopter that makes the money, it's the second adopter. And so we'll perfect anything you do and make it better. But in all seriousness, you're doing amazing things there, and the best of luck. And please join me in thanking Dr. Evans.